Does your Nintendo Switch 2 HDR look washed out with desaturated colors and blown out highlights in docked mode? Here's exactly how to fix it for any TV or monitor. The problem lies in the way Nintendo has designed the adjust HDR procedure on the Switch 2. On the first test pattern with two symbols, many users are struggling to get the sun on the right to disappear, while keeping the sun on the left clearly visible. On the second screen, which only appears once you press the Y button on the Joy-Con and therefore can be easily missed, the default value set by Nintendo was overly bright, leading to a perceptually flatter image where midtones are pushed too high, hence reducing dynamic range and leaving insufficient headroom for specular highlights. I have explained the purpose of these two adjust HDR screens in a previous video, but I guess most of you just want the numbers like on Tinder. So I will show you the exact number of clicks you need to set both screens correctly, such that properly graded HDR games won't look washed out, desaturated, or blown out on your TV or monitor when using the Nintendo Switch 2 in docked mode. Let's start with the first screen containing a test pattern with two suns, not to be confused with Tatooine's weather report, which lets you set the max TML or maximum tone map luminance. Basically, you are letting the game's HDR tone mapper know the peak luminance of your display, so that the brightness of the content can be adjusted to fit within the display's capabilities, preventing highlight detail from being clipped in bright areas. If you have a TV or monitor with HGiG support, or whose tone mapping can be disabled completely, then this part is easy, because this test pattern has been designed specifically with HGiG in mind. LG Electronics has been the earliest adopter of HGiG, with even the C9 and E9 OLEDs from 2019 already supporting this crucial best practice for HDR gaming. I'm going to show you what to do on an LG OLED TV, but don't worry, throughout this video I will cover other brands too, even those which don't support HGiG. Okay, on an LG OLED TV, you need to first change the picture preset to HDR Game Optimizer mode, then go into the brightness submenu and change dynamic tone mapping or HDR tone mapping to HGiG. Next, on the Nintendo Switch 2, go to the first adjust HDR screen. Go down until both suns are clearly visible. From here, gradually go up, one click at a time. As soon as the sun on the right disappears, stop. The sun on the left should still be clearly visible at this point. Once that's done, click Next to move to the second Adjust HDR screen, then press the Y button to adjust the slider which lets you set the paper white value. Here, it would be helpful to know the max TML value you have set in the first screen, because the paper white nit value changed by each click on the second screen depends on the max TML value set in the first screen. In my previous video, I suggested using an Xbox Series X to find out the max TML value, but several viewers have pointed out that Cyberpunk 2077, the award-winning, neon-drenched RPG, actually provides a readout of the console's max TML value within its in-game HDR settings. So big thanks to everyone who pointed that out. This is why I love this channel's community. We are all learning together to help obtain a better HDR gaming experience. With this in mind, I rechecked the numbers after installing the latest Nintendo Switch 2 firmware update, which has rolled out since my last video. By cross-referencing the brightness slider in Cyberpunk 2077, I was able to confirm that each click up or down on the first adjust HDR screen on the Nintendo Switch 2 corresponds to exactly 10 nits. This means that we can now calculate the max TML value based on how many clicks it takes for the sun on the right to disappear on the first adjust HDR screen by using this simple formula. Multiply the number of clicks by 10, then add 80. Don't worry, I have done the maths for you so you don't have to, because I know there are two types of people when it comes to maths. I'm the third kind. Anyway, to give an example, if the sun on the right disappears after 72 clicks, that gives you a max TML of 72 times 10 plus 80, which equals 800 nits. Once you determine your max TML value, Use this chart to find out the number of clicks you need to go up along the Paperwhite slider on the second Adjust HDR screen to achieve our target reference white luminance of 200 nits recommended by the ITUR BT2408 document for consuming HDR10 content in a dark room, as measured using my Canon reference monitor with inbuilt HDR analysis tool. On recent Samsung OLED TVs, you can engage HGiG by first switching to HDR game mode, then go into the Game Picture Expert submenu and set Game HDR to Basic. Also, inside the main picture menu, you need to make sure that sharpness is lowered to 0, HDR tone mapping is set to static, and contrast enhancer is turned off. Otherwise, the TV would apply edge enhancement, dynamic tone mapping, or contrast boosting, which would interfere with the test pattern and prevent the sun on the right from disappearing at the correct luminance level. With these optimized settings applied on your Samsung TV, adjust the first HDR test pattern on your Nintendo Switch 2 until the sun on the right first disappears, while the sun on the left remains clearly visible. Count the number of clicks required from minimum, then refer to my nits chart to find out the correct setting for the second Adjust HDR screen for 200 nits Paperwhite, remembering to press the OK button instead of the back button to save the settings. Note that on some earlier Samsung TVs which lacked the HDR tone mapping setting, dynamic tone mapping would remain active despite HGiG being engaged, causing both suns to disappear at the same rate. In such cases, simply follow our recommended number of clicks for non-HGiG displays, which I will cover later in this video. Sony still hasn't implemented full HGiG support on their TVs, so we will be applying a workaround I pioneered during my review of the Bravia A90J OLED back in 2021. First, select the Game Mode picture preset on your Sony TV. Then go into the Brightness submenu and disable HDR tone mapping before adjusting the HDR test patterns on the Nintendo Switch 2, using my nits chart as a guide for the second screen. After locking in the settings, change HDR tone mapping to gradation preferred on the TV when playing Switch 2 HDR games in docked mode. Otherwise, here are some other HGiG capable TVs and monitors I've tested from various manufacturers over the past few years. On the latest Panasonic OLEDs, selecting HDR True Game Mode should result in a hard clip at the display's peak brightness while delivering accurate colors out of the box, making it easy to set the first Adjust HDR screen on the Nintendo Switch 2 correctly. Higher-end Philips OLED TVs also allow you to disable tone mapping and simulate HGiG when using HDR game mode. On ASUS ROG OLED gaming monitors, go into the HDR Settings submenu and select the Console HDR picture preset, which hard clips at the panel's peak luminance, so you can follow the Switch 2's instructions directly, stopping as soon as the sun on the right disappears. It's a similar case with Alienware's OLED gaming monitors in recent years, where enabling console mode activates source-based tone mapping, allowing for accurate use of the two-symbol HDR test pattern on the Switch 2. Some TCL TVs offer an HGiG toggle in the Game Master menu, but may clip the sun on the right earlier than expected, a side effect of TCL's HDR10 algorithm which tends to overbrighten the image, consistent with the company's belief that consumers prefer an enhanced picture over outright accuracy. At the other end of the spectrum, Hisense TVs and LG Ultra Gear OLED gaming monitors currently apply HDR tone mapping roll-off by default with no option to disable it. Hopefully these brands will introduce support for HGiG or source-based tone mapping with accurate PQEOF tracking in the future, so that owners can enjoy a more faithful HDR gaming experience. In the meantime, if your TV or monitor doesn't support HGiG, you can refer to our Nintendo Switch 2 HDR nits chart to get as close as possible to the correct settings for your display. And if you are still unsure, a reliable fallback is to use 92 clicks on the first screen and 6 clicks on the second, targeting a max TML of 1000 nits and a Paperwhite of 200 nits. These are solid catch-all values that should work well across a wide range of displays. A quick word about the RGB range settings on the Nintendo Switch 2. In our testing, the automatic option typically defaults to full range on most HDMI 2.1 capable displays. Some users have taken to leaving the switch to set to automatic, but manually selecting limited range on their TV in an attempt to compensate for raised blacks or washed out appearance in certain games. While this approach can give the impression of more pop or contrast in some scenes, it introduces a video range mismatch which can distort the overall contrast, potentially leading to issues like overblown highlights or increased polarization in brighter content. For the most accurate HDR presentation, we recommend leaving both the Nintendo Switch 2 and your display set to auto to ensure proper luminance mapping and signal handling, even if some HDR titles may appear slightly flatter or more subdued due to their artistic intent. With that out of the way, another common question in HDR gaming is whether to choose HGiG or dynamic tone mapping on the display side. Fortunately, I've already done a detailed technical comparison between these two approaches, and you can watch my explanation video by clicking here.